Matteo Valdivia left $50,000 inside his study safe. Not by accident, not out of carelessness, on purpose. Every bill counted, every bill deliberate, stacked inside a heavy obsidian safe he had left cracked open just wide enough for temptation to breathe through the gap. He had done this before, many times. He called it the Judas trap, and he had been sitting behind a two-way mirror in the narrow surveillance room just off the hallway for 3 hours, arms folded, jaw tight, waiting. He was good at waiting when it mattered. Matteo was 41 years old, a tech billionaire who had built his empire from a single idea in a studio apartment with no furniture and a laptop propped on a cardboard box. Sharp, controlled, relentlessly precise. The kind of man who read contracts the way other men read love letters, searching for the lie hidden between the lines. He had 15 employees who worked inside this mansion. 15 people who had walked through his front door, smiled at him, said good morning, and eventually, when they thought no one was watching, showed him exactly who they were. 15 tests, 15 failures. Some took the money fast, some waited. One woman left it alone for 11 days before she cracked, but they all cracked, every single one. And so Matteo had arrived at a belief that sat in his chest like a stone he had long stopped trying to remove. Everyone had a price. It was only a matter of time before you found it. Elena Morales had worked for him for 2 years. She was the only one who had never given him a reason to doubt her. Not once. Not a single complaint, not a single stolen afternoon, not even a sideways glance at anything in this house that was not hers. She was quiet and thorough and invisible in the way good staff are invisible, present when needed and gone when not. And somehow, that made him want to test her more than anyone else, because the ones who seemed clean were always the most dangerous. Trust, in Matteo's experience, was just a failure of patience. If you waited long enough, everyone showed you the truth. Today was Elena's truth day. He had called her in that morning with a simple excuse. The East Wing needed a deep clean, nothing unusual. He had watched her arrive through the front gate at 7:15, punctual as always, her dark hair pulled back neatly, a cloth bag over one shoulder, wearing the same white uniform she wore every time she came. She had greeted his security guard by name. She always did that, small thing. Matteo had noticed it the first week she worked there, and had filed it away the same way he filed everything away. As data, as information, as something that told him who a person thought they were when no one important was watching. He was watching now. The surveillance room was cold and narrow and smelled faintly of recycled air. On the other side of the two-way mirror, the study stretched out in morning light, warm wood panels, dark shelves lined with books no one read, and in the far corner his obsidian safe. Heavy, black, serious as a threat. The door was cracked open by precisely 3 inches. Inside, the cash sat in loose stacks, hundreds and fifties, $50,000 in total, casual and unguarded and impossible to miss. He had left the study door unlocked. He had made sure Elena's schedule brought her here first. He heard her footsteps in the hallway before he saw her, steady and unhurried. The soft sound of someone who had no reason to rush because they had no reason to hide. The door opened and Elena stepped inside. She was carrying her cleaning caddy, a cloth draped over her arm. She moved the way she always moved, with a kind of quiet focus, eyes taking in the room before her hands touched anything. She set her caddy down near the door and looked around. And then she saw the safe. She went still. Not the dramatic stillness of shock, but the deep stillness of someone whose body has just received information that the mind has not yet processed. Her eyes moved to the gap in the door, the spill of cash visible inside. Her chin dropped slightly. She did not move toward it, not yet. She just stood there, and behind the mirror, Matteo leaned forward almost without realizing it. Come on, he thought, come on. Elena walked slowly to the safe. She crouched down in front of it. One hand came up and touched the door but did not swing it open. She was looking at the money the way you look at something that makes your heart hurt, not with greed but with recognition. Her lips pressed together. Her free hand went to her mouth. And Matteo saw, in the cold, pale light of the study, that her shoulders were shaking. She was crying. Not loudly. She would not let it be loud. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and breathed through it and let it pass the way a woman who has carried things alone for a long time learns to let things pass. When she lifted her face again, it was dry, decided. She reached into the safe and took the money. Mateo's hand went immediately to his phone. He had the local precinct on speed dial. He had used it before. He watched Alina straighten up with the cash in both hands, and he was already pressing the first number when she did something that made his thumb go still. She set the money on the desk. She pulled her phone from her pocket and began to photograph every bill, slowly, one by one, front and back. Then she took out a small, worn notebook from her breast pocket and opened it to the first clean page. She wrote one word, just one. And though Mateo could not read it from behind the glass, he would learn later exactly what it said. Debt. She tucked the money into her bag carefully, almost gently, the way you carry something that belongs to someone else. Then she closed the notebook, closed her bag, picked up her cleaning caddy, and got to work cleaning the study as if nothing had happened at all. Mateo stood behind the mirror with his phone in his hand and did not call anyone. He stood there long after Alina had moved on to the next room, long after the sound of her had faded down the hall. He stood there and stared at the empty safe and thought about the single word she had written in that little notebook. And for the first time in a very long time, Mateo Valdivia did not know what came next. Mateo gave her a week. He told himself that was the reasonable amount of time to wait before a person started spending money that was not theirs. He had seen it before. The new shoes first, usually. Then the handbag, or the phone upgrade, or the quiet resignation letter slipped under his door with a polite excuse about a family situation or a better opportunity. He knew the pattern. He had watched it play out 15 times in 15 different ways, and it always ended the same, with an empty space where a person used to be and a number to call his lawyer. He watched Alina on Monday. She arrived at 7:15 the same as always, same uniform. Same cloth bag, same quiet greeting to the man at the gate. She cleaned the west wing without missing a single baseboard. She reorganized the linen closet on the second floor without being asked. She left at exactly the time her schedule said she would leave. No new shoes, no phone, nothing different at all. He watched her on Thursday, same thing the week after that, same thing again. He found himself checking the surveillance feed at odd hours, not to catch her doing something wrong, but because he genuinely could not understand what he was seeing. Or rather, what he was not seeing. She was not spending the money. She was not hiding. She was not even acting like a person carrying a secret. She was just working. Quietly, steadily, the same way she had always worked, as if $50,000 had not passed through her hands 3 weeks ago. He started watching more carefully. He noticed she had stopped taking lunch. She used to eat a small packed meal in the kitchen during her break, something simple she brought from home in a container. Now she skipped it. She drank water and kept moving. He noticed her uniform, which had always been clean and pressed, had begun to look slightly loose on her frame, like it had been washed so many times it had grown one size larger, or like the woman inside it had grown one size smaller. He noticed she had started staying 20 minutes past her shift on certain days, tidying things she had already tidied, as if she was looking for extra time to justify extra pay. One morning he came downstairs early and found her on her knees in the hallway scrubbing a section of grout between the floor tiles that did not need scrubbing. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. No embarrassment, no scrambling, just that calm, level gaze. "I noticed some discoloration," she said. "I wanted to take care of it." He nodded and walked past her to the kitchen. He stood at the counter with his coffee and listened to the sound of her brush moving against the tile and felt something he could not immediately name sitting low in his chest. Exactly 1 month after she had taken the money, he went into the study on a Sunday afternoon when the house was empty and opened the safe. He almost missed it. Sitting at the bottom of the safe, tucked against the back corner, was a small folded piece of paper and a thin stack of bills. He picked up the bills first and counted them. $400. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat and unhurried, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who takes care with things even when no one is watching. Week 4, balance $49,600, EM. He read it twice. He stood in the study alone holding those $400 and that small piece of paper and felt the floor do something strange beneath him, not literally, but in the way the ground shifts when something you were certain about turns out to be wrong. She was paying it back. He went back to the surveillance footage. He went back further this time, further than the safe, further than the study. He pulled the external camera footage from the side gate and cross-referenced it with the timestamps on the footage from nearby streets, and he began to trace where Alina went after her shifts ended. What he found took him the better part of an evening to piece together, and when he finally had the full picture, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. She was working 2 other jobs, a cleaning shift at a downtown office building on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, a weekend position at a small hotel 3 blocks from the bus line she took home. She was waking before 5 in the morning and not getting home until after 10 at night on the days she worked all 3 jobs. He pulled what financial records he could access through his network, and the numbers told the rest of the story plainly and without any softness. She was depositing almost her entire combined income back into his safe in small weekly increments and living on what was left over, which was almost nothing. Rice, canned goods, water from the tap. She had not bought a single non-essential item in 4 weeks. Then he found out why she had taken the money in the first place. A property lien. Her mother's home, the house where Alina had grown up, had been days from foreclosure when she walked into his study that morning. 3 months of missed mortgage payments. A bank notice that had been ignored not out of laziness but out of desperation, the kind of desperation that comes from juggling too many crises at once and running out of hands. The $50,000 had stopped the foreclosure. It had saved the house. It had bought her mother time. Matteo sat in the surveillance room that evening and looked at the small monitor on the wall and felt the walls of that narrow space press in a little closer than they usually did. He had built this room to feel powerful in, to feel right in. The room where he proved himself correct over and over again. But that night, it felt less like a throne and more like somewhere a man hides when he does not know what else to do with himself. He checked the safe again at the end of week 8. Another note, another careful payment. The balance dropping slowly, faithfully, one hard-earned dollar at a time. Then, in the 10th week, he opened the safe and found nothing. No money, no note, just silence where her handwriting used to be. The 11th week came and went. Then the 12th. 3 full weeks of nothing, and somewhere across the city, Alina Morales had gone quiet in a way that felt different from peace. It was a Tuesday morning when Alina came in and did not greet the guard by name. Matteo noticed because he always noticed, and because in 2 years she had never once walked through that gate without saying good morning to whoever was standing at it. But that morning, she walked past with her head down, and her bag held tight against her side like something she was afraid of losing, and the guard looked after her with a small frown that he quickly rearranged into nothing. Matteo was already in the surveillance room before she reached the front door. She moved through the house differently that morning, still working, still thorough, but slower. The kind of slow that has nothing to do with laziness and everything to do with a person carrying something heavy inside their chest that keeps catching on everything. She paused too long in the hallway. She stood in the kitchen doorway for almost a full minute, one hand on the frame, eyes somewhere far away, before she shook herself back and kept moving. She made her way to the study last. She pushed the door open and stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room and looked at the safe. Just looked at it. The morning light came through the tall windows the same way it always did, warm and indifferent and unbothered by any of it. The safe sat in the corner, dark and solid and silent, the door closed now, the way it had been closed for weeks. Alina set her cleaning caddy down on the floor. She sat down in front of the safe, not on a chair. On the floor, both knees down, the way a person sits when they have run out of the energy it takes to stand. She pressed one hand flat against the safe door. She bowed her head. And then she started to talk. Her voice was low and unsteady at the beginning, the voice of someone who has been holding something in for so long that, when it finally comes out, it does not come out clean. She told the room everything. She said she had taken the money because her mother was going to lose the house where Alina had learned to walk, the house where her father had died in the back bedroom with his hand in her mother's hand, the house that was the last solid thing her family had left. She said she had told herself it was a loan, that she would pay every dollar back, that she was not a thief, that she was just a daughter who was out of options and out of time. She said she had believed that. She had believed it every single week when she put money into the safe, every single meal she skipped, every extra shift she worked in the dark of the evening when her feet hurt and her eyes were burning. She said her mother had gotten sick. A sudden thing. Medical bills arriving before the last ones were even sorted. She said she had done the numbers 4 times hoping they would change, and they never changed. She was still $4,100 short, and she did not know how to close that gap, and the weight of it had become something she could feel physically, sitting on her sternum every morning when she woke up. Her voice cracked on the next part. She let it crack. She did not try to smooth it over. She said she was sorry, not to Mateo by name, to the room, to the house, to whatever was listening. She said she knew what she had done and she knew what it made her, and she had lived with that knowledge every single day for months, and it had not gotten easier, not even a little. She said the guilt was worse than the fear of being caught because the fear at least had a shape she could prepare for. The guilt just lived in her and changed her slowly from the inside, the way water changes stone, quietly and without mercy. She pressed her forehead against the cold face of the safe. "Please," she whispered, "please just let me find a way to make it right." The study was completely still. And then, from the doorway, came the soft sound of a footstep. Elena went rigid. She turned, and Mateo was standing at the threshold of the study with his hands at his sides, and his face doing something she had never seen it do before. Not anger. Not the cold, composed expression she knew from 2 years of working in his house. Something open. Something that looked like it cost him something to wear. He was holding a small notebook. Her notebook. Elena got to her feet slowly. She did not run. She did not apologize again. She stood up straight the way she always stood, back square, chin level, even though her hands were trembling at her sides and she could not make them stop. Mateo walked into the room. He stopped a few feet from her and looked at the notebook in his hands and then looked at her. He had found it weeks ago, he said, not by searching for it. It had slipped from her bag one morning in the hallway and he had picked it up before she noticed. He had opened it because he told himself he had a right to. And what he found inside was 11 weeks of entries. Dates, amounts, running totals, every payment she had made recorded in her clean, careful handwriting, every week accounted for down to the last dollar. A ledger of a debt she had been carrying completely alone. Elena looked at the notebook and said nothing. Mateo said he had watched her for months. He had watched her skip meals and work double shifts and put her entire paycheck back into his safe $100 at a time. He said he had stood in the surveillance room and watched all of it and had kept waiting for the moment that told him he was right about her, the moment that confirmed what he had always believed about people. But that moment never came. Instead, what came was week after week of a woman doing the hardest possible thing, choosing honesty when dishonesty would have been so much easier and so much kinder to herself. He opened the notebook to the last page. He showed it to her. $45,900 returned, $4,100 remaining. Elena's jaw tightened. "Yes," she said, "I know the balance." Mateo looked at her for a long moment. Then he took the notebook in both hands and tore it in half, clean down the middle. He set both halves on the desk beside him. "Paid in full," he said, "by your character." Elena stared at the two halves of the notebook on the desk. Something moved through her face, a wave of something she could not hold back, and she turned her head to the side and pressed her lips together and breathed through it the same way she breathed through everything, slowly, quietly, refusing to come apart entirely. When she turned back, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "That is not how debt works," she said. Mateo almost smiled. "No," he said, "it is not, but this is not a debt anymore." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded document and set it on the desk beside the torn notebook. He told her what it was without drama, without ceremony, the way he made all his decisions, cleanly and without apology. The mortgage on her mother's house cleared entirely, paid off that morning. The house was no longer in any danger. Elena looked at the document. She looked at him. Her mouth opened and closed. "This is not pity," Mateo said before she could speak. "And it is not charity." He paused, and the pause held weight. "It is what is owed." You spent 2 years being honest in a house that was designed to make honesty feel foolish. That deserves something. That deserves more than I can put in a document." The study was quiet for a long time after that. Alina picked up the 2 torn halves of the notebook and held them in her hands and looked at them. Then she set them back down on the desk. She looked at the safe in the corner, dark and silent and no longer a trap. She looked at Matteo. She said, "I came here every week wanting to confess to someone. I just did not think it would be you." He said, "I came here every week wanting to be right about something. I just did not think I would end up being glad I was wrong." A week later, Matteo called his head of operations and told her he was closing the surveillance room permanently. He had the two-way mirror taken down and the equipment removed. He had the room converted into a small office with a window that looked out over the garden, a room full of light instead of shadows. He promoted Alina to estate manager. He told her the position came with a real salary, full benefits, and absolutely no tests. She looked at him for a moment when he said that last part, and then she nodded once, the same way she had always nodded when she understood something completely and did not need it repeated. On her first evening as estate manager, Alina stayed past the end of her shift to finish reorganizing the supply room, not because she had to, not because anyone was watching, but because it needed doing and she was the kind of person who finished what she started. Matteo walked past the open door of the supply room on his way to the kitchen and glanced inside and saw her working. He did not stop. He did not say anything. He just kept walking. But this time, he was not hiding from anything.